it's a manufacturing system. All of life is a way to create copies of things or to replicate information, including storage of information. Actually, hard drives are probably one of the worst ways for long-term storage. DNA might end up being the best way to have, millennia or, even longer scale storage, where you want something that has redundancy that's built in, and it can store and can be put at really cold temperatures and survive even cosmic rays. So I think DNA might be the best hard drive of the future, potentially.
This is really interesting. Okay, what is DNA? What is RNA? And what are genes?
Yes, we should, because I presume the audience knows it, but some might just be first-time listeners coming.
There's a person right now
who's like
in Brazil smoking a joint, sitting on the beach, and just wants to learn about DNA. So please, Chris, can you explain it to them?
DNA, the deoxyribonucleic acid, is the recipe for life. It is what carries the instructions. In almost all of your cells, you have a copy of your genome. It's actually the reason I became a geneticist, is because the day I learned that as an embryo, we start as just a single cell, but all the instructions there to make every single type of cell in your body, I was and still am endlessly fascinated by that. That is extraordinary. That is, to me, the most beautiful thing in the entire universe. That it is a completely, from one single embryo, everything is there to make the entire body.
Which aspect of that is most beautiful? So is it that there's this information within DNA that's stored efficiently, and it also stores information on how to build, not just what to build.
Yeah.
And so from all of that, what's the sexiest, what's the most beautiful aspect? Is it the entire machinery, or is it just the information is there?
It's the fact that the machinery is the information, like that they basically, it becomes its own manufacturer, is what is extraordinary. Imagine if you took a 1 2x4 and you threw it on the ground and you said, "I'll be back in a day," and then a whole house was made when you came back. I mean, we would all lose our minds. A lot of people would poop their pants. People would have to wear adult diapers. It would be a big scene, if that happened. And that we're actually getting close to that. People having autonomous house building. It's not quite there yet, but there are people trying to make robots that will build entire houses.
But you need much more than the block of wood.
Right. That's the extraordinary thing, is it just fit one piece of wood there and say, "I'll just leave it there for a few days and I'll come back." Yeah. That's basically what embryos do. Okay, it takes 9 months, a little bit longer, but still, that is nothing short of magic, right? So I think that's what I love about, the fact that DNA carries that information. Now, the information is static, so to actually read that information and to actually put it into motion is where RNA comes in. So this ribonucleic acid, so it just has one other oxygen added to it, versus DNA, but it is the transcribed version. It's like if you look at a book and you say you can have it in your hands, but then you start to read it aloud, it becomes the active form of the recipe for life, is the RNA. And then those RNAs also then get translated to become proteins, that become active forms like enzymes. You think of like your hair, or think of other ways you digest food. There's all these active proteins going around that are copying your DNA, making RNA, making sure your DNA is safe. There's all these built-in systems to keep your cells in check and working, and these are often in protein form. And so genes are these constructs. Basically, what are the instruction sets? Like, how many versions of instructions do you have in your genome? So the genome is the collection of all the DNA of a person. For humans, it's about 3 billion letters of genetic code. So just 3 billion A's, C's, G's, and T's, these nucleotides that are the recipe for life. And that's it. That is the entire instruction set to go from that one embryo up to a full human, which is pretty efficient, if you say. That's actually not that much information. And in that 3 billion letters are snippets of the genes, which are independently regulated, autonomous instruction sets, if you will, these really active forms of the instructions from your DNA to say, make a protein, make this RNA, or turn off some other part of a cell. All those instructions are there in our DNA, and there's about 60,000 of these genes that are in our genome.
So how do those all lead up to you having a personality, good memory and bad memory, some of the functional characteristics that we at the human level are able to interpret, the way your face look, the way you smile, you're good at running or jumping, whether you're good at math, and all those kinds of things.
There's an age-old debate of nature versus nurture. So like most things, if given two options, you can of course have both. So almost every trait that we know of in humanity has mixtures of nurture and nature. Some of them are purely nurture. So most people are probably familiar with twin studies, but twin studies are one of the best ways to gauge how much is something nurture versus nature. How much of it is really ingrained and has probably less ability to change versus how much can you really train. So height, for example, is one of the most obvious inheritable traits, but it doesn't have one gene. It probably has at least 50 or 60 genes that contribute to height. So there's not like a gene for height. Some people think of like the gene for cystic fibrosis. Now, in that case, that's true. There is one gene that if you have mutations, you get cystic fibrosis as a disease. But for other traits, they're much more complicated. They can have dozens or even hundreds of genes that influence your risk and what appears. But from twin studies, you take monozygotic twins that are identical, and you can clearly tell they have the same facial structure, similar intonation, similar even likes, and you compare them to dizygotic twins, or when you have fraternal twins, you can have a male and female, for example, in the same uterus, and those are dizygotic twins or two zygotes. So in that case, they share 50% of their DNA, but they share the same womb. And then what you can look at is what's the difference between identical twins versus fraternal twins, and calculate that difference for any trait, and that gives you an estimate of the heritability, or what's called H squared. So that's what we've been doing for almost every trait in humanity for the past 100 years. We've been trying to measure this, and religion is one that's a negative control. So if you separate people and see what religion they become, there's no gene for religion or what religion you choose. So that often the correlation there is zero, because it should be. It's a nurture trait. What religion you end up taking is not encoded in your DNA.
Religion meaning Islam, Judaism, Christianity. But there could be aspects of religions that...
There is, good question. There is religiosity as a trait,
yes,
which has been studied in twins, and that has a heritable component to some degree. So, and things like boredom susceptibility is a trait. One of my favorite papers just looked at how likely is it that people get bored, and they looked at identical twins and fraternal twins, and there's a heritability of about 30%. So it's mostly not heritable. It's like mostly environmental, but that means to some degree, whether or not you're bored, you can say, well, it's a little bit of my genes. You could it's a little bit, not a lot, but most traits have some degree of, and they're probably overlapping with other traits, like your boredom susceptibility versus risk-seeking behavior are interrelated. So how likely are you to say, I want to go, cliff jumping, or I want to do freebasing, or I want to, do something else that's risky behavior.